Okay, good morning, everyone. It looks like we started. Welcome to this webinar where we're going to talk about increasing business value by embracing domain-driven design. My name is Paul, and I'm here with Evelyn. Evelyn, maybe you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Evelyn. I work as a strategic software delivery consultant at Exebia, and I have a strong focus on designing socio-technical systems, which we will get back to later in this webinar as well.
Cool. So my name is Paul de Rij. Just like Evelyn, I'm also a strategic software consultant at Exebia. And I have also a lot of interest in social technical systems. And that's what we're going to talk about today a lot as well. Because maybe, let's talk about why this webinar. So what we see is that a lot of this in organizations where we enter, either by training or consulting, we see a lot of the same problems. And commonly, this has to do when technology and people come together, or better, they should come together there. And that's what we're talking about with social technical perspectives. And that's what we want to dive into today, and how domain-driven design can help you to overcome some of these problems. And this is why we got to, hey, let's do a webinar about this. And yeah, we're glad that you have joined. And we're going to talk about a few things today. Well, how did we get here? We're going to talk about complexity, the values and benefits of domain-driven design and what it is. And, we'd like to help you to get going, to start embracing domain-driven design for your organization. So let's dive into that. So just let's look how we got here, right? So domain-driven design, we feel can help you to increase your business value, to make functionalities, perform better, quicker. But before we diving into how domain-driven design can help you with that, let's take one step back, because DDD is a methodology that you could use, but it has to fit in your context. It has to fit in your problem, in your organization, and it's important to understand that context and look at it in different perspectives to see if domain-driven design really is something that can be useful for you. So what we all need to understand is that technology is very important in how it influences our core business. It can make or break our competitive advantage, right? By jumping on the latest technology X, you might be way more efficient than your competitors, or it makes your life way easier to gain insight in the customer so that you can, you can change your business better and perform better. So there's a lot of pressure on digital leaders in what level of the organization to make the right decisions, right? And there's a lot to choose from. Do you need to go to the cloud? Do you need to start to use voice technology, IoT, or whatever? But, has anyone found the silver bullet yet? Has anyone found that single technology that helps you to gain competitive advantage because, you've changed your core business for the better? And all of these things aim for the same, right? Shorter time to market, faster delivery, cost reduction, fast delivery of value to the business. There's a lot of things going on there. And what we feel is that one thing often gets overlooked, and that's the people. Because to us, people is what makes you competitive and not the technology.
Yeah, and that's why I also really like this quote. It basically says that this is something that we are forgetting, and we are not just investing in technology, we are actually mainly investing in people, and it's up to us to balance that properly, and that can be a challenge, of course, because also the investments that we do in technology are very often more tangible, and we can see them, and we can see the return of investments maybe quicker or sooner. But we have to be aware that we are investing in people, that we have to do that because that is eventually what will make our technology processes more sustainable. And that means that we have to deal with people and technology, and that means that we have to deal with social technical complexity. And actually, it's about 3 aspects: socio-technical complexity, and like I said, we have to deal with people and technology. But there is a 3rd aspect which makes this thing, and that is the cognitive aspect. So it's up to us to balance out these three aspects and their interrelationships, because these three aspects heavily influence each other. You cannot just focus on one of these three aspects. If you just focus on the technology aspects, or you're just mainly focusing and investing in technological decisions, then that will impact the social and the cognitive aspect. So every architectural decision that you make will, for example, influence your culture or your relationships or processes or something else. And these three heavily influence each other. So we have to know how we can balance these three aspects and the interrelationship between those things. Because what we need to realize is that we are living in something called socio-technical systems. We are working and living in these socio-technical systems. So we have to balance these things all the time. And that is hard, because we tend to focus on the technical side of things because that's our comfort zone. It's more tangible. And we are not aware that these three aspects are balancing each other out. And if you know that, and if you can use that knowledge to your advantage, then it will give you a competitive advantage for sure. So it's up to us to design these socio-technical systems, to create them, and to deal with the socio-technical complexity within these systems. And when we talk about complexity, yeah, that's of course a pretty vague concept. I mean, complexity, yeah, we all have a definition for that. And there is not really a unique definition of complexity. But what we mean by complexity when we are talking about it, it kind of comes down to the phenomena which emerge from a collection of interacting objects. And that's not our quote, of course. And it's not the definition of complexity, because yes, it can mean a lot more than that. But for us, it's especially about these interacting things, interacting objects, because that is what makes everything that we do super complex, and it makes our daily work complex, and it makes these socio-technical systems super complex. So complexity can be found everywhere, organizations, technology, culture, software, and at the same time, this complexity is influencing everything that we do. For example, our products, our value streams, our relationships, our architectures, basically everything that you're dealing with on a daily basis. So what we feel is that this complexity of an organization has to match the complexity of the technology, because everything is interrelated. So you have to find out how you can balance this properly. And to maybe make it even more complex, there are also different kinds of complexity. And in this webinar, we would like to discuss two of them specifically, which are accidental and essential complexity. So that can be confusing, two terms. So I would like to explain that with a pretty simple example. So the difference between essential complexity and accidental complexity. If we go out of our daily work and go out of the IT world or software development or whatever, I always use this example. So let's say you want to go to your favorite restaurant. From your home, you want to go to your favorite restaurant. The distance from your place to the restaurant is the essential complexity, because this distance it's there. You have to deal with it. You have to get to the restaurant, and this distance won't change. So that's the essential complexity. What you can influence and what you can make more or less complex is the path you take to that restaurant. So you can decide to take the shortest path. You can also decide to take a really long walk, or to decide to only walk on the right side of the street, or to walk around 3 blocks around a church or whatever. You can decide how you get to that restaurant. So the path you're taking there is accidental complexity, and you can add as much as you want. You can make it as complex as you want, but you can influence that part of the complexity. And if you compare this to a more work-related scenario, what helps me in defining if it's essential or accidental complexity is basically if I feel the urge to throw things around and I get really frustrated and I'm screaming like, why the hell is this thing so complex and I don't really understand it, then it's probably accidental complexity. And if it leaves me with a, well, let's say a mild form of depression, but I do know why this thing is so complex and I know what I have to do to solve it, then it's probably essential complexity. So we have a couple of examples on this slide, and we're not going through all of them, but what we can remember is, well, the essential complexity is the complexity that cannot be reduced. It's required. So let's say we have the problem domain. It has complexity, and we cannot really reduce it because it's there. We have to deal with it, and it's just there. But accidental complexity is a complexity that we can add ourselves. So we can create and fix it. And by we, I do not just mean engineers, because there's a misconception there. Very often I hear that, yeah, well, the developers or the engineers are adding the complexity, and they're making things way more complex than they should be. That's not the case. Everyone involved can add accidental complexity. It's not just in the software, it's not just in the technology. For example, the last two examples, the ineffective change management processes and the implicit power structures, these are things that cannot, well, very often they cannot be directly influenced by the development team or engineers. This is something where leadership has to step in. They can influence this, and they have to be aware of the fact that this is heavily influencing everything that a team is doing. So it's very important to be aware of this difference between accidental and essential complexity, to be able to recognize it and to be aware if and to what extent you can influence it. So is this something that I can influence? Do I need help? And you have to know who can influence it so that you can manage that accidental complexity and deal with that socio-technical complexity and decrease it.
So Fred Brooks, which is the author of The Mythical Man-Month, has a nice quote on this, right? So basically what he says is that the complexity of the software is equal to the complexity of the problem. And what I like about that is that if you're really aware of what your problem is and the complexity of that problem, it can help you to figure out how to solve it in the best way, right? If it's a simple problem, you don't need a very complex or a very advanced methodology to solve the simple problem, right? But if it's a complex problem, then that also means you might need a more complex methodology to solve that essential complexity. And the same goes for architecture or how you organize your organization around it. And for me, software creation isn't factory work. So on high levels, there are things in IT that you can compare to factories, and the Phoenix project is all about that. But if I look at just creating that single functionality, that single epic, it isn't simply factory work. It is not just here's input and there's output, but often that is how we treat it, right? We have some product owner that sets up the requirement, throws it over the fence to the developers, and then hopefully we get the expected output. And this, I always need to think about this thing which we call business and IT alignment. Well, I've been in organizations where people said to me, well, business and IT should align a bit more. But to me, as soon as I entered a sprint meeting, for example, it felt more like seeing a grave farm. Because, on one side, we have the business. They are expert about the business problem, and they also feel that they are expert. So anything that comes from the techies in this case, they just feel as rubbish. I'm the expert. I know all the things about the business. So why are you challenging me, or why are you giving me additional information? And it's not just business, right? We as engineers do the same. And as engineers, we know all the technical complexities. We know all the things about architecture. So if someone challenges that, which is not an engineer, we get into our own assumptions as well, and we start to not listen. We start to defend ourselves maybe, or just ignore it. And you see that both parties are operating on their own assumption set, having their own biases here at play. And that is where I often feel that most of the methodologies that are out there are not solving the business and IT alignment problem, because they're not focusing on the right thing. And for me, the right thing is focus on start listening, start to get people to talk with each other and to truly listen in that, because there's culture here at play. Our culture has taught us that we don't have to listen. We are the experts. We are in our own expert system. We don't want to get told what to do. We don't want to be challenged on our ideas. And That's how we go into meetings. That's how we work with each other, and we need to break that down. Because in the end, all of these things is accidental complexity. It has nothing to do with the complexity of the problem itself, but we've added it because all these social activities where cognitive biases are in place is adding complexity to solving the problem. And it's not just that, right? It's not only those biases. Power structures, maybe due to formal and hierarchy, but informal, there's also a lot going on, which are influences in our solution space. There's a lot of context switching maybe for teams because they don't have to only focus on the checkout, for example, but also on logistics or other parts of the business. And it's all draining, getting the focus away from the actual problem. And this is where we feel where domain-driven design can help out, and not just DDD, but also visual collaboration methods that are, a part of DDD or added to DDD, because DDD can help you to focus on that core essential problem to your essential complexity. What is the problem that the business have, that our customers have, and that we want to solve? And it adds things to manage the accidental complexity. So for example, ubiquitous language is a big thing with DDD. Speak the same language as a development team as the business. Understand very well what payment means or what product means. And not just product in the whole company, but in your specific context, where you have logical boundaries, where product means the same. Because as an example, for an e-commerce company, product in your catalog on your website is not the same as product in your logistics or product in repairs. They have different kind of meanings. And DDD, by utilizing ubiquitous language and context, help you to manage that accidental complexity. Because things become much simpler if we know, well, I'm in repairs, so this is what product mean there. That makes the complexity less, makes it simpler. And visual collaboration can also help to structure that collaboration. It provides easy means to get it to more honest, more open conversations where people can start listening and where it's more, let's say, democratic for everyone to pitch in. So yeah, that's one of the things where domain-driven and the visual collaboration methods can help.
Yeah. So we need insights, right? I mean, we want and we need insights into our organizations and our architectures. And that's also why we model a lot. We like modeling. We do that a lot. It gives meaning, so it helps us most of the time. And we feel that modeling is not something that is best done in isolation. Because before you start modeling your software, you have to understand what you're going to model. You have to understand the context. You have to get that context right, because you cannot just start and see where you end up. Well, you can do that, but if you have the context right, then it's probably going to leave you with better results. So to get this context right, you need a dialogue. And this dialogue is really, really important, because if you start a dialogue, if you start the conversations, you will get to something that we call the shared sense of reality, because you will start to understand each other better. You will get multiple perspectives in, and you will get that context right. So we model to start a dialogue, to get everything on the table, to make sure that we are understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, and to get that big picture straight. And that is a really, really important thing. So collaborative modeling is something that we do a lot. We like doing it as well. We do it at companies, at clients. We also do it in our trainings. And we have a couple of examples what that could look like. So collaborative modeling means that you get everyone in a room that is important and that has something to add to the discussion. So it's not just a technical party. You invite everyone who is of added value to that conversation to get that big picture right. So it can start with a big picture event storming session. And well, this is basically about grouping things that go well together. You start discussing the big picture process. What is it actually that we are doing? And then we can start grouping things together that go well together, and we can visualize it. That's the power of that visual collaboration part. We are visualizing these groups on a big brown paper, and it's clear to everyone, and we can discuss this in person. And when we're doing this, we will also find natural boundaries, because they will emerge once we start talking about what groups well together. Natural boundaries will emerge, and that is a really, really important thing, because once you know these boundaries, you can also centralize these groups around these natural boundaries that emerge. And for example, context mapping is a technique that you could use to do this. So if you know what groups together, if you have these natural boundaries and you start talking about these domains or these problem areas that you have, you can also start organize for flow. You can start creating autonomy while you are staying close to the problem without creating or adding a ton of accidental complexity. And that is a really, really huge benefit. And when you have that foundation, when you have that map, your context map, and mind you that we haven't even started modeling any software yet until this point. We were just busy creating that context, getting the context right, creating that big picture that is going to help us. After that, we can start thinking about how we are going to model our software, and we will be better at that because we know what it is that we want. We know our context and we know why we're doing certain stuff. So if we have this foundation and the natural boundaries, then we could also start thinking about how can we organize our teams in an optimal manner so that we can benefit from this. And you can use, for example, team topologies to do that. That's something that we often use. But this will help you create and design these socio-technical teams, socio-technical systems, because you are balancing stuff out, and you will also balance out Conway's law, which is also a very interesting thing here. But this will help you in creating these socio-technical systems and teams, and that is a very, very important thing. So domain-driven design can really help you in going through that process, and it will help you come up with this shared sense of reality that's really important to go further. So DDD has a couple of values and benefits, of course. We are not going to create a sales pitch out of this because that's just not who we are and what we want to do here. But we want to share some of the values and the benefits that we see in practice, so that things that we see at organizations that are embracing DDD. And we divided them into 3 categories with some practical applications underneath it. So the first thing, that shared sense of reality, that is a huge benefit, and it's a huge competitive advantage as well. So because you are speaking in the same language, you actively try to understand each other, you're putting in an effort to get that context right. You are creating those boundaries, you will start to live in that shared sense of reality. And that is a really, really important factor, and DDD can really help you get there. Constructive communication is something that we all want, but something that we are not that good at, unfortunately. Like Paul said, the ubiquitous language is something that is really helpful. Thinking about the language that you are using, thinking about how you are communicating with each other, the language, the wording that you're using, working together more in a visual way will really help you go to that constructive communication. And it will help you to challenge assumptions, because if you're in a room together with a lot of people and you are collaborating in a visual manner, it will be easier to challenge assumptions. It will be easier to ask the right question, to ask maybe some critical questions to someone, but it makes it easier to challenge assumptions because you are in the same room, you are talking to each other, and you are talking about stickies on a wall and not about things that might be there or might not be there. And the last thing, the competitive advantage, what we see is that it helps organizations move faster, and it helps them focusing effort on their core businesses. If you have that context map that we were talking about earlier, it will be easier to determine where your core business is, your core areas are. And if you know that, then that will help you to allocate your resources in an optimal way. And of course, that has a whole lot of other benefits. But these are some things that we see in practice where we come that we feel are very valuable when it comes to embracing domain-driven design. So how do we start with that then?
Yeah, so our message is start embracing it, right? But maybe you need some pointers on that. And as a developer perspective, one of the things that we often see is, well, you can talk about it a lot, right? But just start showing it. Start very small. There are some things that you can do relatively easy without too much knowledge. It's just start experimenting. And for example, if there are things fuzzy between teams, look into organizing a big picture event storming. Look at the whole process and check where those logical boundaries, those contexts are, and see if that makes sense. Because maybe you figure out that you are sharing things that you shouldn't be sharing, or that handovers that you see there are not what you should expect. It helps to clarify the language and the communication style. Or maybe you're starting to work on a big new epic and you need to investigate and research what that process entails, right? Again, here, go for an event storming session and learn about the process and the languages that is used. And not just from the product owner, right? Invite stakeholders, invite that subject matter expert from the business, and let them talk about what the process is so that you can learn and ask questions and find problem areas if they are there. And the big thing here is that we start to move towards together we create, instead of just, here are a bunch of requirements, put in a Jira user story and go build me that and be finished tomorrow. Because that's not reality. That is definitely not creating the shared sense of reality. So move towards together we create. And if you're, as a developer, part of a team or product owner or whatever, you have the ability to do so. Just, block 2 hours and go for it. You just go experiment. If you start the conversation, you've won already. I think that's one of the biggest things. But maybe you have a different kind of role, more leadership role. Why should you invest in supporting DDDs? Well, as we've tried to show and talk about here in this brief period of time, we talked about how teams can help you to build the right thing in the right way. And that disconnect between business and IT, you can help to remove that disconnect as soon as you help start the conversation. So if teams are asking for 2 hours to talk with business, don't shoot it down. Support it, facilitate it, because it can help you to mitigate a lot of conflicts and problems. And often those conflicts, don't show up in the beginning of the project. It's always somewhere in the end, probably when the deadline is near, where you suddenly have a lot of conflicts and problems, and it's on your shoulder to fix them. Now, so let's move that, continuous feedback, move left here, go have that conversation early on so that we learn and understand each other better. Now, look at how you design your social technical systems. There's a lot of text here, but if you go back to the basics, right? Find those logical boundaries where handovers between teams make sense. Right, where you can split the communication, where you can be clear about expectations between context A and context B. Because if you have those boundaries clear from the start, that's where you can make an impact on delivery time and the rate of change and the amount of conflict and the happiness of your people in your organization. Because in the end, it helps you to focus, and not just you as a leader, but all your teams, all the people in your organization, to focus on the core business, right? We talked about removing accidental complexity. This is slashing and eradicating accidental complexity. And as a bonus, more business value. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to start investing and supporting in DDD. And also, you don't have to roll this out to your whole organization. Go experiment with a team. Maybe there's a big project coming up. Go experiment and try there. Because in the end, we talked about those social technical systems, and as a leader, it's very important to be aware of that. To our view, that is exactly what the responsibility of leadership is. Looking at how people and technology, how those interact, and how you facilitate it as an organization. Think about the essential and the accidental complexity that you have in your problem space, in your solution space. What's there in your organization? What kind of processes are actually, not contributing to solving the essential problem, but are just adding fuss? Get people to start listening, right? Organize visual collaboration. Talk about it. Experiment it for yourself, right? Maybe if you have a next one-on-one or a next session with your manager, maybe do more than talking, just start drawing things. Maybe it works, maybe you get into a different kind of understanding. And the most important thing is that all the modeling that we do in domain-driven design is to start a dialogue. It's not to document, it's not to fulfill some kind of ISO standards. No, it's about getting more grit, more understanding on the problem, so you can make a better solution. And maybe the solution is not technical. Maybe you find out that things, let's see if it happens, right? If this only happens twice a month, maybe you shouldn't build a system for it, but just, get someone on the phone to solve that problem, right? You can talk about these things. So the biggest thing is go experiment, right? Go start to try things out, but maybe you need a bit more domain-driven design knowledge. Well, at Academy, we have an introduction to DDD training, which is 4 hours online. So definitely, if you have more interest, check that out. And of course, we can help. So at the end of the presentation, we'll share a page where we put on some of our favorite resources around this, and where you can look for more information. And otherwise, you can send us an email to ask for more information. Maybe we can help each other out somewhere. Which brings us to the Q&A, which at this moment seems a bit empty. So if you have questions, there's a box on the webinar. Feel free to shoot some questions.
Yeah, I'm seeing something here around, do you have some more practical stories or some war stories, maybe that's the right word, about what we've experienced at customers or in jobs or whatever? Yeah,
so what I can talk about is what got me into this social technical systems, right? So I worked at a large e-commerce company in the Netherlands for 5 years, and part of my job years ago was to create a cloud vision, which is in the end a technology choice. And I think we nailed the vision technically, and the technology was good. It helped out a lot of people in the organization. I think it set us out for the right path for the business. We were able to scale and to grow easily and these kind of things. But I also ran into a lot of problems in the organization, and that turned out because we weren't clear on the social systems, right? So for example, we said we go for Cloud A, and now it needs to be enabled. So we created a team that was, creating our platform in the cloud, but we totally forgot to make clear where the responsibilities are. And that's where team topologies came up as well, right? So is this a platform team only responsible for creating the platform, or are there enablers in the whole organization to get people into the cloud? And we weren't specific about this. And because we weren't specific about it, we ran into all kinds of social problems, which ended up with, people not happy with each other, people leaving the company. We took a lot of times in meetings which were unconstructive. And in the end, in retrospect, I was responsible for that because I didn't look at the social context. I didn't look at the things that were required to make this technology effective in the organization. And that's how I got into the social technical systems. And I think we see a lot of organizations having the same problem, where there's a lot of conflicts, a lot of fights in the organization, which you in the end can trace back to, hey, we've done something with the technology, but we forgot the rest. And because we like arguments on the technology, we're going to talk about that, but we need to take one step back, look a bit higher, and look at that social technical system. So that's kind of a war story that I have.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there's of course the question came in, which is important at this time. Big picture event storming and context mapping is kind of hard when working remote. Any experience with that or tips? And this is something for sure that we have been struggling with, because we like to do these sessions, to organize and facilitate these sessions. And yes, it's easier to do when you are in the same room together. So we have been struggling with that as well, but we are finding ways to do it remotely. Not that long ago, we also did a webinar on example mapping, how we did that remotely. That's another technique here. But we are working on that, and there are tools available that you can use to get similar results Of course, I'm more of a fan of being in the same room because you also get to see the non-verbal communication of people. But there are things that we could do. For example, Miro is a very cool tool that we use a lot, where you can actually do this visual collaboration collaboratively, because you can all get in the tool. If you find a way to include video from another tool, then you kind of get similar experiences. But yes, it is possible. It's harder to do. It's even more important, in my opinion, to have a good facilitator in these kind of sessions. But it is doable, and there are various tools that you could use for that. And we will also add some of them on the website that is now on the slide, and then you can check them out. And if you have any questions or whatever, just send us a message, and we are happy to answer.
Yeah, and to add to that, there's a virtual DDD community. A colleague of us is heavily involved in that community, and they also have a website full of heuristics, and they also added a section for remote sessions. Definitely check that one out. We'll put it on this page as well, the Embracing DDD Help Me Out page. But there's a lot of useful stuff there.
Yeah. There's another interesting question. Who do you consider as the one that needs to manage the accidental complexity? And in my opinion, that is a shared responsibility. I mean, just similar to, it's not just one person responsible for adding the accidental complexity. It's not just one person responsible for managing it or solving it to a certain extent. The problem with accidental complexity in many cases is that we are not aware of how much accidental complexity we are adding by just collaborating, by just communicating with each other, by just making decisions, by not informing each other about decisions. I think if you want to start managing that accidental complexity, first step is to start recognizing it. And that has a lot to do with talking about it. Try to see if you can distinguish between accidental and essential complexity in what you're doing, and then find ways to manage it. But I think it's not necessarily helpful to appoint one person or certain people who are responsible for managing it, because maybe then that would be the case that I'm managing it at that point, and someone else who is not aware of what I'm managing is adding more accidental complexity to that same problem, and yeah, then I can start over again. So that can also be a risk. So what I've seen working best is if it's something that has been talked about in a team. It is good to have maybe one or multiple facilitators in that way that know how to address the issue. But the responsibility of managing it is I think should be a shared responsibility. That's what works best in my experience, at least.
Yeah. So we have another question. If I understood correctly, one of the goals of DDD is to minimize dependencies. So if I want to start DDD principles, defining flows of information would be one of the first steps to applying DDD. Did I get it right? Yeah, I think you get it pretty right. So basically, it's one of the examples that we show, and one of the things that we do a lot in companies is that we look at, okay, what's your entire process? So, we take your main process and we go from beginning to the end, and we're going to see where those logical boundaries are, those contexts. And that's basically also your flow of information. Because if we do a big picture event storming, we'll see how information goes from left to right or from top to bottom. And we can also look if that makes sense. And if we feel that the picture makes sense, then, okay, where do we draw the boundaries? Where do we find the context? And then we get into the other steps. But definitely looking at your flow of information is one of the first steps that we can recommend.
Yeah, definitely.
So another question is, you mentioned Conway's law when talking about big picture event storming. What can you do to avoid that accidental silos are reinforced when modeling? Evelyn.
That's a good question. What can you do to avoid that accidental silos are reinforced when modeling? I'm not sure if I understand it completely correctly at this point.
So how I interpret it is, when we do when we do the big picture event storming, I think it's important when everyone, you need to invite the business, the subject matter experts. Big picture event storming is not something you do with 3 or 4 people. You do it with tens of people. Whoever is knowledgeable about the process needs to be there to share his knowledge.
The most valuable sessions that I did when it comes to big picture event storming is when the more knowledge that's in the room, well, the more related knowledge that's in the room, of course. It's not just a party for the whole organization where everyone can join who wants, but the more valuable and related knowledge that's in that room, the more valuable that session is. I've been in some sessions where they invited someone from marketing, sales, legal, HR, all that sort of departments as well. And that is really, really helpful in order to get that big picture right. And that is also what will keep you from getting into these silos again, I think, because the most valuable conversations was actually that someone started talking about something in that process, and then sales came in and was like, yeah, but before all this happens, I have to do this, and this. And not everyone was aware of that. And just getting those insights, getting that big picture context right, that is what brings value and what will lead to the best conversations. So it's important to think about who you invite to a certain session. And if you're not sure about who to invite, then I'd suggest that's something that you discuss as well, that not just think about it and then do something, but discuss it with a facilitator or other people that are involved, but really think about all the knowledge that could possibly be related to that big picture event storming. Yeah,
I think one of the flaws that we often see is that people think that the business is aligned, right? So, we look at the product owner and everyone, beyond or before the product owner, that they are aligned, but often that's not the case. You will find business lines being surprised at each other about, hey, but I didn't know you did it like this, or that you were interfering with my process. So that's why it's also valuable to get this one in the room.
Yeah, agree. Yeah. There's another one. Is it possible to integrate DDD and BDD? There's an expert here. Yes, it is. I think a good starting point there is the webinar that I mentioned earlier. We did something on example mapping and BDD. And actually, I think that one is available. We will also add it to the website. But yes, there is a way to integrate that, because they can really reinforce each other, actually, DDD and BDD, if you do that in the right way. So yeah, that's something that we should add to the website, and I will write that down now so that we don't forget it.
Okay. So one of the questions is, any ideas on how you can drive this DDD approach bottom up? I think it's important here that you, as a team, then also look at your own responsibilities, right? And just by starting to map can really help. So, for example, if you're working at a new epic, and the process is difficult, start mapping that with process event storming. One of the things that I also find useful is that when someone joins the team, for example, draw the context map. So look at your surroundings. I'm responsible, for example, for the checkout, but what are the different contexts that are looking to me? Because it really helps a lot in understanding what your neighbors are, what your dependencies are. And these are things you don't have to have approval from management, right? You can't just do this as your team. It might take you 1 or 2 hours, fine, but the knowledge is very valuable. And especially if you go more to the strategic DDD patterns, where you look at, well, I have a dependency on this context, but what kind of relationship do we have? These things can be really valuable and help and gain a lot of knowledge. And I think this is what you can do from bottom up. And if it works for your team, you've already run one. And if you're an ambassador within your organization, that's a double win. But start by what helps you, and then see what you can do with your organization. Creating ubiquitous language is also relatively easy. Talk with your product owner, let them invite the stakeholders as well, and ask about the process. By mapping, you will find what the language is and start using that language in your code as well, or in your artifacts. I think these are very well, simple things or low-level things. It's easy to start with and start experiment and start showing the value to the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's also the value of DDD is that you actually can start small. I mean, you don't have to start up a whole circus to do something or to start seeing the value of things. It can be a really small start with just some experiments, and that is once you show the value of something, it's easier to continue it without having to invest a lot in it. So yeah, once these first wins are becoming visible, and don't hesitate to communicate them, then the next steps will be easier probably. Yeah.
So there's one question. How do you deal with LSS? And that, I think it's less, but maybe it's liberation.
The lean movement.
Lean Six Sigma.
Yeah, I think
probably. How do you
probably.
deal with Lean Six Sigma diehard fans when mapping the information workflows? Well, you're familiar with it. I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, I'm not necessarily how to deal with these diehard fans when mapping the information flow. I feel some frustration here. So maybe if Anna Maria could elaborate a little bit more on this question, what exactly do you mean? How to deal with diehard fans? I mean, what are your struggles or your frustration with them? Then that might help us to better answer that question. Yeah. Right. Yeah, she did mean the Lean Six Sigma. That's she's now saying, right? Yeah. If you could just elaborate a little bit on the frustrations, then that might help us.
So in the meanwhile, we do one other question, and I think then maybe we can answer that one for Anna Maria, and then our time seems to be running out.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is that the tools that we mentioned in the example, are they just for strategy, or do they help the tactical and the operational? So the tools that we've mentioned here are mainly strategic, from strategic patterns. But if you're aware about your strategic patterns, about your high level things, in the end, it flows down to the tactical and operational as well, right? So they influence, they help each other. But the patterns as we showed them here are mainly strategical.
Yeah, correct. There's an elaboration. Conversation goes towards the methodology, and it's a bit hard to keep those fans at bay. So I think if I'm interpreting this right, then it's just really hard to get some people out of their comfort zones. I mean, we are all used to working in a certain way, and we like certain methodologies, and some we don't, and everything that's new, that's scary, and has to be proven before we start using anything. And again, I think the win here is it's about creating that shared sense of reality. So it's also about understanding why others are such a huge fan of a certain methodology, despite which methodology that is. What is it that they value in the methodology, and how could you benefit from it in the future? So again, this starts with understanding each other, getting that dialogue started. Why are you doing certain things? Why are you making certain choices? And why wouldn't this be a good option to explore? And then invite people to start experiment nevertheless. I think that's because it doesn't just go for Lean Six Sigma. I mean, we encounter lots of people and lots of organizations which have been stuck in ways of working for years, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's how the world works. But then it's about challenging other people, trying to understand them first and challenge them to get out of that comfort zone and to, maybe to experience what other methodologies have to offer, and don't just tell them, but show them. I mean, start doing something with visual collaboration and see where you end up. That's something that might help.
Yeah, so the last question that we can answer is from my mom. How to manage time when having sessions with a lot of people and different ideas. So I think there are two things here. One is to accept that you want to hear all the people. So it does take time. I think if people go into a meeting, I want to be done here in 10 minutes, it won't be a very open session. So Big picture event storming or event storming, it will take a bit of time where everyone's opinion is heard. And by the way, how it's structured, it helps that people are able to get heard by taking some personal time where everyone can write his own thoughts and put it up there. I can go on for this by hours, but we'll put on the page a link to the virtual DDD website with a lot of heuristics that also help and give a lot of ideas how you can handle this, because it's too much to go into right now, but there are some great tips there. And check out the community. I think the community is very open. There's a lot of Slack channels or Twitter where you put your question out there, and people start to answer them.
Yeah, so we will elaborate.
Sorry.
We will add some more things to the website that's now here. So we will do that later today, so that it's complete. Yeah, everything will be there.
Yeah. So no, Evelyn takes notes about what we need to add, so that will work. And thanks for all the questions. Great to see so many questions, and thanks for attending this webinar. I've enjoyed it, at least. Evelyn, you too?
Same. Cool. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. So that makes us wrap this things up. Thank you very much, and well, perhaps soon.
Yeah, feel free to connect with us anywhere, or to send an email or a message. And yeah, have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.